Sami Hamdi is the editor-in-chief at the International Interest. He joins me now live from London. Sami, thanks for your patience. I know that you've been on the line for a bit now. You had a chance to listen to our correspondents, both Nizar in Gaza as well as Fatih in occupied East Jerusalem. What do you make of what's going on in terms of the Israeli operation that's just launched under an hour ago?
I think it's important to stress that the Israelis could not have done this without the permission of Biden. And I think when Biden came out and said that he did not believe that Israel was using excessive force against the Palestinians, both in Al-Aqsa and in Gaza, I think that was more a reflection of his approval of this ground operation that Netanyahu has been warning for some time. And Biden has his reasons for doing so. The first of them being that he believes that there should be a crushing of Palestinian resistance first and foremost, in order to pave the way for an environment in which he can come in and be the peacemaker. As long as there is a sense amongst the Palestinians that there is no possibility of any resistance and that Israel is this overwhelming force, then a peace plan by Biden in which it recognizes, in which it legitimizes the theft and seizing of land on the part of the state that is today known as Israel, it becomes much easier to force the Palestinians to do so. And indeed, Biden doesn't want to deal with Hamas or with Gaza or with the Palestinian resistance, but wants to deal with the Palestinian Authority that he believes are far more amenable to a deal that will see a recognition of the theft of land in what is now known as Israel. And I think also on the second part, it's important to note that this public defiance of Israel on the part of 90,000 Palestinians in Al-Aqsa Mosque, this defiance of Israel's Iron Dome that's been conducted by Hamas in Gaza, this defiance of Israel that has seen rockets land in Tel Aviv and actually bring the war to the doorstep of Israelis, whereas in the past they've been allowed to live in this bubble while the Palestinians have been bombarded. Netanyahu believes he cannot allow this to go unaddressed. He needs to utterly pound the Palestinians, utterly crush the Palestinians, publicly in a manner that the world can see, so that everybody essentially can come to some sort of agreement in which Israel should be recognized as a superior party, and that the oppressed Palestinians, their only option is to sit at the table and accept unfavorable terms that essentially mean giving up their homes, giving up their land, allowing themselves to be kicked out of Sheikh Jarrah, and eventually giving up East Jerusalem. These are the calculations that are being made with regards to Israel and the United States. And I think it's also important to note Bloomberg is reporting that U.S. officials are stating that not a single Arab state has requested U.S. involvement in the issue, or has rather requested U.S. to stop Israel from embarking on this. The reality is that in the past, we used to see Arab states such as Saudi Arabia threaten to break bilateral ties with the U.S. This time we're seeing Saudi and UAE media essentially propagating a narrative that the Palestinians are to blame. We're seeing Saudi Arabia now refer in its official statements to Israel as opposed to the Zionist entity. We're seeing the absence of any terms of occupation or colonization that we used to see in Arab statements from Saudi Arabia. Now it's omitted entirely from their statements. We're seeing a lack of action on the part of countries whose rhetoric is perhaps a bit harder on Israel, but perhaps not taking essentially action that might pressure. So when Biden is considering and weighing up his options, he believes that no U.S. interests are under threat. The Arabs will not compromise U.S. interests for the sake of Palestine. Neither will the Muslim world and the other Muslim allies. And therefore, he believes he's able to take his time, allow Israel to strut its stuff, allow Israel to bombard Gaza, because he believes at the end of the day, all of the Arab parties will come to the table and they will follow precisely what Washington says, and that Biden will communicate with Riyadh and get Riyadh to force Mahmoud Abbas in Palestine to agree to unfavorable terms. The UAE will propagate to the Arab world that this is a good deal. The Morocco will do the same. And the other countries that are perhaps seeking to enact diplomatic efforts to defend Gaza, these countries will relent to the reality of the situation, which is that they lack the power as a result of a fear of U.S. sanctions and a fear of their own domestic situation. And as a result, at the end of the day, it will be Israel that gains the upper hand. These are the considerations that are at play.
Okay,
but I think the final point, sure, go ahead.
No, I was just going to, we're sort of running short on time. If we just get your last comments from you.
I was going to say that the final point that it's important to stress is that we must speak about this narrative as it is, as opposed to the alternative reality that Israel and the Western world are trying to impose. What we're seeing for the first time in a long time is the most effective resistance on the part of the Palestinians to assert their right to their land, to assert their efforts against this injustice that is trying to be legitimized by the international order and by the United States. And this is what has infuriated Netanyahu, and this is what concerns Biden. Because if the Palestinians win this round, then Biden is forced to accept that the Palestinians have legitimate ground. And for his peace plan to work, he must ensure that the world believes that the Palestinians have no legitimate ground and that they're only entitled to territory that Israel dictates, which in reality is no territory.
All right, Sami, there's a lot to unpack there, but thank you very much for that analysis. Sami Hamdi, live for us from London. Thank you.